This week, the NFL kicked off their free agent frenzy. Free agency kicked off, and teams have been signing players left and right. Well, some teams. Here's a stat for you that you probably don't want to hear. Right now, only 2 teams around the NFL have not signed a free agent: Baltimore Ravens and the Jaguars. This is a pretty new feeling from Jaguars, since most years they've been one of the big spenders when it comes to free agency. This year, Jaguars really didn't have much cap space to work with. To go on that sort of shopping spree that fans have kind of gotten accustomed to at the start of free agency, the Jaguars had just under $7 million in cap space. That's enough to work with, but it would make it tough to pass out some of those big deals to those top free agents. That includes trying to keep some of their own guys that would collect some big cash. Here's the full list of the Jaguars free agents that started the week. Now, it is a pretty long list, and the Jaguars' goal this offseason was clear. They just wanted to run it back. They were hoping to keep as many of the guys as possible, keep the band together, and most of these guys that the Jaguars have on this list, actually pretty reasonable chances of keeping them. But the list we talked about on the Sports Zone last week, there were 2 players that stood out at being difficult to retain: Arden Key and Jawan Taylor. Now, the Jaguars struck out with both of these guys. Arden Key signed a 3-year contract with the Tennessee Titans. Now, losing Arden Key is bad, but losing Jawan Taylor, much worse. Taylor signed an $80 million deal with the Kansas City Chiefs. One hand, letting Taylor walk out the door lets the Jaguars possibly see exactly what Walker Little can do at right tackle as a permanent starter. But on the other hand, why is another team valuing a Jaguars player more than the Jaguars? The Chiefs have basically been the gold standard around the NFL. I mean, they just won the Super Bowl, and they're willing to let their own left tackle, Orlando Brown Jr., walk and sign this guy, Jawan Taylor, who has never played left tackle in the NFL. And they paid him more money than Brown got on the open market. So they must think that Taylor is a pretty significant upgrade. Now, I'm not saying that this was a big miss for the Jaguars. I'm just saying that if I'm going to pick a front office to trust their judgment, I'm going with the Chiefs, and they have the Lombardi trophies to back up that trust. Ultimately, I've said it before, I don't think the Jaguars were really in a place that they could afford to just let their own young players leave. And in that same breath, Walker Little has shown enough in the limited action that he's gotten that I understand the team kind of wanting to find a way to get him on the field more, even if that meant losing a guy like Jawan Taylor, and we will miss him here in Jacksonville. While the Jaguars lost those 2 players, they've actually been hard at work keeping some of their own guys. They lost Chris Manhertz as well, but here's 3 guys that they re-signed this week that were free agents. One, safety Andrew Wingard. Now, of course, everybody knows it's always the Jags, and he came into the Jacksonville Jaguars organization as an undrafted free agent, been able to make his mark on this team, played in a lot of football games for the Jaguars last year. They also able to keep Adam Gostis. He signed a 2-year deal. He's been with the team since 2020, been a key reserve along that defensive line, so keeping him really helps them keep the depth that they've earned at that position. And they also able to re-sign slot corner Trey Herndon. The veteran came into the organization as an undrafted free agent, really made his mark as a veteran presence in that secondary. Herndon has been a key member of the Jaguars defense for a few years now, so keeping him here in Jacksonville is a big part of the Jaguars theme this offseason of keeping the band together and just running it back one more time. While none of those signings are exactly considered splash moves after a week of free agency, here's a look at some of the top guys left on the market. Jaguars likely won't be interested in most of these guys on the list, but that's not why I'm showing it to you. I'm just showing it to say there's still a lot of talent that the Jaguars could go after if they were so motivated. Keep in mind, Arden Key, who we just talked about as a big loss for the Jaguars, Jags didn't sign him until March 30th last year, so there's still plenty of time for the Jaguars to go and find some players that could make big contributions in this next season. But with limited cap space to work with, the Jaguars' biggest improvements are going to come from other places. I know running it back with the same squad after they lost in the divisional round of the playoffs has some folks kind of scratching their heads, but there is room for growth on this team. Now, keep in mind the Jaguars have already added in this guy, Calvin Ridley. If he delivers on his goal of 1,400 yards, the Jaguars' offense would have a pretty good chance of putting a lot of points on the board next season. But the biggest place the Jaguars are banking on improvement is with some of their homegrown players. Guys like Trayvon Walker, #1 overall pick from last year. When they drafted him, they knew that there was definitely a lot of room for growth with this player. We saw flashes at times last season, but we definitely haven't seen the best football from Trayvon. If he can take a big step, that would help the Jaguars defensive line group and definitely help the pass rush. Trayvon's fellow draft mate from last year, Devin Lloyd, another first-round pick. He's a guy who had success on the football field last season at times. He was an early Rookie of the Month and then struggled on the football field at times, even getting benched at one point last season. Devin Lloyd, another guy that could take a big step forward. His development would help the defense move forward. If Trayvon and Devin Lloyd can both take a second-year jump similar to what we saw from Tyson Campbell or Andre Sisco, the Jaguars defense will be in a good position. But another guy who wasn't a rookie last year that we can probably expect a pretty big jump from is Travis Etienne. I know it's tough to exactly think about him as a rookie last year because he's going into his third year in the NFL, but last season was his first year on the field. That Liz Frank injury benched him for that entire rookie year, and now he has an offseason to work on his game instead of rehabbing. So there's definitely room for growth, and we have not seen the best football from number one. And if he can continue to get better, the Jaguars offense will be in a good position moving forward. Those young players are what the Jaguars are banking on, their growth to help them take that next step into the future. But the biggest place the Jaguars will get some of that outside help from, the NFL draft. The Jaguars have the 24th pick this year. Should be able to get a player who's going to help them out on the field immediately this season, and they'll definitely need it. We'll be talking all about the Jaguars and their draft hopes in the coming News4Jags podcast. You can always find those over on News4Jags.com and in the News4Jags Plus app or anywhere that you get your podcast. New episodes come out each week with the latest Jaguars news from myself and Justin Barney.